At the end of Parshas behaloscha, this week's Parsha, we find the incident that Miriam spoke Lashon Hara concerning her brother Moshe Rabbeinu. And as a result of that, Miriam became a mitzoras. So the pasuk tells us that Moshe Rabbeinu was mispal on her behalf. He said the words, Kel no rafon Allah, vayitzak Moshe el Hashem leimor, Kel no rafon Allah. Moshe Rabbeinu was mispalal that she should have a refuah. This is really the first time in the Torah which we find that someone was mispalal explicitly on behalf of a chayla. It was handed by Avram in Parshas, but not as explicit as this. And therefore, in past years, we have spoken about the inyan of being mispalal for a chayla, what's the proper way, how a person should articulate it, etc. Tonight, Rabbi said we're going to speak about being mispalal for a chayla as well, but from a very, very different vantage point. And that is, we're going to speak about Rabbi Sai, if you're allowed to be mispalal, that a chayla should die. Meaning as follows: it is unfortunately not a common occurrence that you have a patient that is very, very ill, terminally ill, and at least according to medical science, derech hateva, which means from a medical scientific standpoint, the person is incurable and is terminal, and the person is suffering greatly. Now, of course, Hayat Hashem Tiktzor, nothing is beyond the capabilities of the Ribbono Shel Olam. The Ribbono Shel Olam can perform a nace, and a person can in fact be miraculously cured, but that would require a miracle. A person is in a state of he's very ill, it's irreversible. And many times Rabbi say of such a patient is suffering great yisurim, and even with palliative care, with medicines that they provide, morphine and the like, the person still suffers greatly. So the question is, in that type of situation, is it mutter in fact to daven that the person should die, and that he should expire, and that he should be relieved of all of his pain and all of his yisur? I say that this is becoming a much more common shaila, because with the advance of medical science, diseases and illnesses that 20, 30 years ago were they couldn't really do anything about, but today, with the advance of modern medicine, doctors are able to provide and to prolong people's lives, which generally speaking is a very good thing. But sometimes the situation is that a person is put in a situation where he's being prolonged, but he's suffering greatly as a result. So the question is a person allowed to daven that he should die? Should a person daven that he should die? Or it's optional? You have the right to daven, you should die, you don't have to daven. What's exactly the halakhic perspective on this question of davening that a chayla should expire? So the makar of this sugya, one of the primary sources of this sugya that all the paiskim and the svarim that talk about this shaila they quote, is a Gemara in Masechta Nedarim. The Gemara says in Masechta Nedarim, Daf Mem Amud Aleph, Ki Yoser Avdimi Yomar Kol HaMevaker Es HaChayla Gair Lo Sheyichya. The Gemara makes the statement that if you visit the sick, you are helping him that he should live. V'chol she'enai mevaker es hachayla, and if you don't visit the sick, gairam lo yishiyomus, you cause him to die. So the Gemara is obviously perplexed by this statement. What does that mean? If you visit a person, it's going to help him live. If you don't visit a person, he's going to die. Just because I don't visit a person, he's automatically going to die. What does the statement, what does the Gemara mean? So the Gemara goes through a couple possibilities of what this could mean, until the Gemara comes to the conclusion, Ela Zot Gemara El Kol Shin Mavaker Chayla if you don't visit the sick, which means if you don't visit him, you don't see his situation, and therefore you're not nispalo, you don't daven that he shouldn't live or he shouldn't die either. That's the Gemara statement. If you don't visit him, you don't ask rachamim, not that he should live, and lo shiyamus. So the Gemara itself makes itself even a little more perplexing, because what does that mean? If you don't visit him, you don't daven for him whether he should live or die. What do you mean? You daven he should die? That's what the word seemed to say. So the Ran in Masechta Nedarim over there on Daf Mem Amud Aleph wonders what this Gemara means. Mirabein writes the Ran, the Hochikam are Pamim Shetzorech Levakish Rachim Ala Cholesh Yamus. The Ran says it explicitly, that there are some situations that a person should daven for a sick person that he should die. Kigoyin Shemitztar HaChoyle B'chol Yov, because if he's suffering greatly, V'ef Shelo Sheyichya, it's not possible that he's going to live. And therefore, says the Ran, that's what the Gemara means. When the Gemara says in the Dorim that if you don't visit the sick, you're not going to daven for him. Sometimes you should daven he should live. Sometimes you should daven that he should in fact die. That's what the Gemara means. That's how we teach the Gemara. So the Ran, of course, obviously needs a raya to this. I mean, it's a novel, mind-boggling statement. Daven for something he should die. So he quotes the Gemara Masechta Ksubis, and this rabbi really is the primary source for this sugya. The Gemara says in Masechta Ksubis on Daf Kufdal Amud Aleph that Rabbeinu HaKadosh, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, the editor of the Mishnayos, there are very few people that are called HaKadosh, but Rabbeinu HaKadosh Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi was referred to with the very unique and singular title and accolade of he was the Kadosh. So Rabbeinu HaKadosh was about to die. Slika Amsei de Rabbi Leigra. So Rabbeinu HaKadosh had an attendant who took care of him. Omra, this attendant, she said, El Yoinim Evakshinis Rebbe. In the Shamayim, the Malachim, they're asking that Rebbe should come up to Shamayim, he should die. The Tachtainim Evakshinis Rebbe. And on the other hand, the Tachtainim, the Talmidim of Rabbeinu HaKadosh are all davening that he should live. So this Amsei, this attendant, this Mishareses, this nurse, she davened, Yirotzain Shiyakufu Tachtainim Esrael Yoinim. I davened that the ones down here should prevail and they should be successful and they should overwhelm the tefillas of the Malachim in Himmel, which means he should live. Zot the Gemara, Kevin the Chazoi Kamazivni Da'il Beis HaKisei. Rabbeinu HaKadosh was suffering from apparently very, very terrible stomach ailments, and he had to go constantly to the bathroom. And he was in great pain. So when the Mishareses, when the nurse saw that, she went back up on the roof and she said, Omra, Yihi Rotzein Shiyakufu El Yoinim Esatachtainim. No. Let the Tel Yoinim, the Malachim, who want to bring Rebbe up to Shamayim, who want him to die, they should be successful in their tefillas and they should prevail. Which means she changed her mind. She changed her mind when she saw how great Rebbe was suffering. So the Ran over here points out, and he says, you see, from this Gemara, says the Ran, that you zot there, Rebbe. Umisham hachi kamar da hamavakar chayla moil tfilas afilu lichyeis neishu tfila yeser mayelas. And that's what our Gemara Nedara means. When our Gemara says that if you fail to visit somebody, you don't have the opportunity to daven or him, whether to daven that he should live or daven that he should die, because sometimes both of those are options. Sometimes you should daven that someone should die. What was the Seif Maisa over there in the Gemara Masechta Ksubas with Rabbeinu HaKadosh? So the Gemara says, that the Talmidim of Rabbeinu HaKadosh, which were all Tanoim, they're mamish the Tanoim of the Mishnah, they kept on davening, which means the nurse held he should die. The Talmidim held that they should live. So what did she do? Zot the Gemara shakla kuza shadya meigra le'ara. So she took like a flower pot or some kind of keli or some kind of utensil. She went up on the roof and she threw down the thing, the utensil, the pot, and it made a loud noise. Everybody looked out the window. What was that? And while they looked out the window, they stopped davening. So then they stopped davening. So then Rabbeinu HaKadosh expired and he went to Shamayim. Ad kan the Gemara. Hishtiku mirachami v'nach nafshi de Rebbe. Ad kan the Gemara. Says the Ran in Masechta Nedarim, you see from this Gemara that the Amsei the Rebbe, the nurse of Rabbeinu HaKadosh, davened that he should die because he was suffering too much. Zok the Ran in Masechta Nedarim, you see from over here that you're allowed, in fact, to daven that a person should die. Azay Zok the Ran in Masechta Nedarim. Now, the Ran in Masechta Nedarim, Rabbi Sai, the Ran is a Rishon, and he's certainly entitled to his opinion, but we don't necessarily always paskin like a Rishon. He's saying the Ran's job is to say a pshat in the Gemara. He's not necessarily paskin this behaloscha. But based on this Ran, the Aruch HaShulchan, which is in fact a halacha sefer, and the Aruch HaShulchan is a bona fide Pesach, well accepted Pesach. The Aruch HaShulchan writes and he says, "Kol ha'mevaker es ha'chayla garm lo sheyichya v'chol she'en ha'mevaker ein ha'mevaker shlom racham lo sheyichya v'lo sheyamus." Quoting that Gemara in Nedarim, that when you visit the sick, you have the opportunity to daven they should live, or in the case may be they should die. Zok the Aruch HaShulchan dilifa'amim yesh levakish rachamim sheyamus k'gein sheyesh le'yisurim harbi b'chol yai. Because sometimes you should in fact daven that a person should die if he's suffering greatly. So in effect, the Aruch HaShulchan quotes this Ran, paskins like this Ran, and this is how the Aruch HaShulchan holds behaloscha. Based on this Gemara in Masechta Ksubis, that you see that the Amsei, the Rebbe, the attendant, the nurse of Rabbeinu HaKadosh, davened that he should die. There is, however, Rabbi Sai, one major problem with the Rayef and that Gemara in Masechta Ksubis, and I'm surprised that everybody didn't jump on me already. What's the Raya? Chazan Albrecht? Well, I mean, who says Chas v'Shalom wasn't a Shaita? What? It was Mekemfregen Besser. Nicht nor how do you bring a raya from the nurse, but the raya is from the Rabbanan Fakert. The Gemara says that the Amsig the Rebbe davened that he should die. V'lo havi zot the Gemara v'lo havi shaski Rabbanan miliboy rachami. So if instead of bringing a raya from the Amsei, they should wait. The Rabbanan held argue with her. So that's a good shaila. Who are you going to paskin like? The Talmidim of Rabbeinu HaKadosh, Tanoim, or the Amseder Rebbe. Now, even if you're going to tell me that the Amseder Rebbe was not some licensed practical nurse who they pulled off the street, and they're paying her minimum wage to be with Rebbe, but she was in fact Amseder Rebbe, and we have to assume that she was chashiv, but still. She held you should daven to die. The Rabbana obviously held that they shouldn't die. So it's a very problematic raya what the raya is.
They were aware of his suffering?
You have to assume that they were aware of his suffering. That maybe they were not he's asking a good question, were they aware of his suffering? You have to assume that they were aware. Maybe they were not as acutely aware as the nurse, but listen, they were there, and they were there, they saw Rebbe. They also saw Rebbe going to the bathroom, I assume.
She changed her mind when she saw him up close.
Yes, she is.
What's that?
She changed her mind when she saw him up close. She knew
Well, perhaps.
Were they aware of that? Were they aware of what the
Well, that's the issue. We can assume that they were. I mean, I guess you could get out of it by saying they weren't aware. But why weren't they aware? I mean, what were they davening for? I mean, they were davening obviously because he knew he was very ill. I don't know if they were aware of that. I mean, obviously when a person's in these throes of sickness, they want him in Shemayim. So
you could say that the nurse had maybe a little more insight in the situation than
the nurse insight into which situation?
The situation that there were angels who were praying.
I can't believe that the Amseder Rebbe knew more about the angels than the Rabbanan of Rebbe. I can't believe that. Hard to accept. That's the problem with this raya. And in fact, Rabbi Yisai, the Tzitz Eliezer in Chela K, in the sections called Ramat Rachel, which is a whole entire section on Inyane Refuah and Machlis, in Perek Hay of Ramat Rachel, asks this kasha. V'yesh lahavin gam harai mimaisa de Rebbe b'chsubis harayada rabba hagamora shemisaper shegam acharei sham amra de Rebbe roms l'rabbanan deibor v'amri yirotzen b'chol zeis lo havi shaski rabbanan milaboy rachami. The Rabbanan did stop. V'im kein harei mi rabbanan rai lehepech gam shekachayla mispatel b'yisur meiroim ve'in takana l'rafua. You see from the Rabbanan that even the person suffering greatly b'derech hatel b'chol zeis ein lahastik milavakish alachel rachami asher lo yipolei mimenu davar. So unless you want to say, like you're arguing, Dr. Ekman's arguing that they didn't know, they weren't aware of the situation. Could be. I mean, it's a starker kashka. Maybe you have to say that. But perhaps there's a different pshara which we can be miyashev, and that's based on Rabbi Yisai. As I mentioned, this is a shaila that's more and more negeya, but this is a shaila that existed obviously in the time of the Mishnah Rabbeinu HaKadosh, and it's a shaila that went to the Paiskim even before the great advances of modern medicine. So I want to read to you from a shaila in this Chuas Chikikei Leiv Chelek Aleph Yeridei Siman Nun from Rab Chaim Palaji. Chaim Palaji was a great Sephardi Paisik, a prolific author, wrote many svarim. One of his songs called Chikikei Leiv. So there he presents the following shaila, which the shaila itself, Rabbi Yisai, is a heart-rending shaila. He says there was a Yid Yirei Shamayim v'Talmud Chacham. There was a Yid Yirei Shamayim, Talmud Chacham, v'yesh la'isha Yiras Hashem. He was married to a fine woman, also Yirei Hashem. U'vavenesenu harabim chol sa'isha niskeres chayli oruch zman rav l'mayla me'eshim shana. And this wife was sick for more than 20 years. Shehi negula mudkis b'yisurim. She's suffering for 20 years. Vehi kalua b'yakisei beisa. Apparently she's an invalid, she can't move, she's stuck in the house. V'ha'isha hazei sevelas ha'yisurim halalu b'machayvim rabim aleho. This woman is suffering greatly. Bala Haniskar, the aforementioned husband, Kibel besaver panim yofis yisure yishtay. Her husband, as difficult as this may have been, he accepted this besaver panim yofis, which means with a smile. And he was devoted to her the entire time. He's devoted to her, he loves her, he shows her the love, which means there's two ways of taking care of a sick person. One is that every time you do something for the person, it's quite evident that you're working very hard and you're letting the person know it's very difficult for me to do this. And then there's another way of taking care of a sick person, and to do it with a smile and say it's nothing, so that the person doesn't feel you're imposing on them. And this husband was such a devoted husband that he did this lovingly and willingly, and he never ever gave any impression that this is too difficult for him. Nevertheless, the woman herself, the patient, used to daven that she should die. She felt that it's better for her to be dead than alive because of the terrible Yisurim that she's suffering. Apparently, the situation deteriorated, and now she's even worse shape. And now, not only is she davening that she should die, but she's asked her husband and her children that they should daven that she should die. Ubala ubaneo haganki nilu machmas hayisur misholim kolzeh meroiv chiba va'ava hayiset tzadekes v'chasida eimen shemela. But because her children, her husband loved her so much, they refused to daven that she should die. Befat that she was a tzadekes va'adarabba. Hey mevakshin talmidei chacham sheyumadu ba'ada. They pay Talmidei Chacham to learn on her behalf. They sponsored, days of learning on her behalf that she should live. Where's where? Well, number one, her husband said they should daven that she shouldn't die. So the rule of thumb always is that husband and wife, you listen to the father and mother, you listen to the father. So that negates that. So they give stuck Yorenu Hamayra Im Yesh Chashash Yisrael Levakish Rachem Moleha Shetamus K'dei Shetanuach Nafsho Eloi. Yorenu Rabbeinu. That means paskin for us. Is it osir to daven that she should die? Is it mutter to daven that she should die? V'intim salem deleka yisr. And if you're going to say that it's not osir for her to daven that she should die, it's not osir. Which means it's a twofold shaila. Maybe it's osir to daven that she should die. Intim salem, it's not osir that she should die. But if her will is that she should die, is it mutter for them to daven that she should live against her wishes? That rabbi say, there's the shaila, the chikikei leiv from Chaim Palaji was asked. As I said, it's a heart-rending shaila. So he's mefalpel with the aforementioned Mar Mekaimis, the Ran, the Gemara Ksubis, the Gemara Nedarim, etc. Lost. Zokte chikikei leiv al kolponim niralani as daiti de kegoin danidan didav lasis pesher davar. He wants to suggest a pesher davar, wants to suggest a compromise. What's the compromise? שאם היא מצטערת הרבה מאוד מהאיסורים קשים מורים ושכל הרבה פעמים בלהפכי אין התיקון וניסיאש ממנו נראה דאפילו הכי לגבי בעלו בניה וקרבו לא יעשה שום בקושי ותפילה שתמוס. Her husband and family should not daven that she should die. They should not daven. Why? ואם יבקשו רחמים עליה שתמוס היקה משום שירמו ויחוסו חס ושלום אחד מן האלה לחששה וחיקה שיבקשו לקרב מסוסה כדי להינצל ממנו ומתיר חדידה. Interesting svara. And that is that sometimes this is such a burden on the family, such a pain for the family, that the family actually wants that she should die. Mamela, in their tefillah that she should die, perhaps there is a personal agenda as well. Not for her sake, but for their sake. And therefore their tefillahs that she should die are perhaps tinged with personal agenda. And that he's not willing to permit, that the person should die because it's a tircha for me, it's a pain for me, it's difficult for me. That you're certainly not allowed to do. You can only daven a person should die if your motives are 100% pure. L'shem shamayim. Now, one could make a case over here that after taking care of her for these 20 years and all that they've exhibited, etc., that one could say, well, if there's any person that's interested in her benefit, but you never know. And therefore, that's his maskana. That the family members should not daven that she should die. But a non-family member who has no perhaps personal agenda over here. Ironically, that type of person can daven that she should die. What should the family do? So this is the old rule of thumb. And the rule of thumb is that sometimes when you're in doubt, the best approach is sheiv al taisa odiv, do nothing. And therefore his psak l'halacha is a very interesting psak. The family should not daven that she should die, and they should not daven that she should live. Because Vibal, she wants to die, and she's suffering greatly, and her rotzen is that she should in fact die, and therefore they shouldn't go against her wishes. On the other hand, that they should daven that she should in fact die, maybe that's a function of their own personal agenda, and as a result of that, he does not want to permit her to die. And that's his psak.
Why can't they daven for a miracle?
Well, they could daven. They could daven that for a miracle, but Al Piderach HaTeva, the Rebbeinu Shalom doesn't make open miracles in our day and age. So that's probably not practical. Yes. So we'll get to that in a minute. So, and he even said, Tzitz Eliezer adds to this, and he says, the Chikikei Lev adds to this, and he says that you can't bring any raya from the Amsei the Rebbe, because the Amsei the Rebbe, she could be totally l'shem shamayim. But we can't compare ourselves to the Amsei the Rebbe, like the famous Gemara that we can't even compare ourselves to the Chamoirei Shel Pinchas ben Yair. That even the donkey of Pinchas ben Yair was, wouldn't eat something that's awesome. So in Marishanim b'nei Adam anu k'chamoirim v'loi k'chamoir Shel Pinchas ben Yair, the Gemara says. So don't bring me rayas not from the Amsei the Rebbe. That is the Chikikei Lev's maskana. As he there. So the truest kinyan ter behaloscha, which is also a contemporary paisek, holds very stark that it's usher ever to daven that a person should die. Number one, he brings a kasha from the Tiferes Yisrael Masechta Yuma, that the Gemara says in Masechta Yuma, it's a Mishnah actually, that a Misha Nafla Olav Mapilas, a building collapsed on a person. Safek Chai, Safek Enei Chai, Safek Shom, Safek Enei Shom, Safek Mei, Safek Chai. You don't even know if the person's alive. You don't know whether he's dead. You don't know how long he could live. The Gemara says in Masechta Yuma, Mafachin Olav Es Hagal. You go ahead and you remove the stones. Why? Because Chai Shom Mikri Chayim. You're allowed to be Machal Shabbos Min HaTorah to give a person a half hour of life. 15 minutes of life. Any amount of time. Chil Shabbos. Why? Because life in itself is valuable. And on top of that's one kasha. But then as he asked, V'oid kashali. Kahayafe sha'achas b'tshuva maisim tovim ba'olam hazeh mikol chaya ha'olam haba v'im keilama yir harashus lamanai afilo ayin etfila mishos b'yisurim shehem bevarei b'tshuva neirah. This is very difficult, Rabbi say, for us to deal with emotionally, but hashkafically this is the right perspective. And that is that all the Yisurim that a person suffers in this world minimizes the person's suffering in Mitzvah Hashem and after Misa. And therefore, Chavivin Yisurim. Again, this is much easier said than done. But the Gemara says, for instance, in Masechta Sanhedrin, that I forgot which one of the Tanoim was very sick, and his Talmidim came in to be menachem him. Whatever they said was to no avail until Rabbi Akiva said, Chavivin Yisurim. The Yisurim are a good thing, because they minimize one person's suffering in Gehenna. Therefore he says, how can you daven that the person should die and miss out on those Yisurim? And no Yisurim, no suffering, no pain in this world is as severe as the pain that a person suffers la'achar misa. I think I once heard from Rav Pam, Zichrayna Livrocha, that he gave a mashal, a mahadavar daimen. I'm not 100% sure it's from here, but I'm pretty sure. This is a parable. It's not a chazal, but it's a parable. What's the parable? A person dies, then he goes up to Shamayim, he goes up to the Bezdin Shalmala, in which they make an accounting of a person's entire life. So they said, okay, Rabbi, let's look at the record. They look at a record, and every time a person does a mitzvah, Rabbi Sai, he creates a malach. That's what the Svarim say. He creates a malach that acts as an advocate on his behalf. So in the course of a lifetime, a person did, hundreds of thousands of mitzvahs. Millions of mitzvahs. Every word of Talmud Torah is a mitzvah. Millions of mitzvahs. So these malachim line up. The malachim, the malitzim taiv. Let's call them the white malachim. They line up, and the line stretches and stretches and stretches and stretches, and the guy's thinking, "Oh boy, I'm in good shape." So then they said, "Wait a minute, now let's look at the Averis." So then they line up the Averis, the black malachim. The line stretches and stretches and stretches. And Nebuchadnezzar sees that the black line is much longer than the white line. Oy, what's that sign? So they tell him in Yeshiva Shalmaila, wait! The counting's not over. He says, because in this world you had Yisurim, you had setbacks, you had illnesses, you had sorrows. The Yisurim knock off the Averis. So they start adding up the Yisurim, all the suffering, all the tsaras. And the black Malachim start falling like dominoes. And they're falling, and they're falling, and they're falling, and the line's getting shorter and shorter, and you're thinking, oh boy, Baruch Hashem, look at them being knocked off. But then all of a sudden, it stops. And the black line of the Malachim, the Mekatrigim, is still longer than the white line. And the person says, "Oy, I wish I would have had more Yisur. I wish I would have suffered more. So I would have suffered more, so then it would have knocked off more of the black hooded Malachim, and I wouldn't have to pay the price in Gehenna." That is what the taina of the Kinyan Torah behaloscha is. That how can you say that you should daven that the person should die to be put out, quoted, to be put out of his misery, when in fact there's a tremendous mila to that suffering. So he holds the halacha, the Kinyan Torah is, it is osur ever to daven that a person should die. So now we have two shittas already. What's that?
Is there allowed to treat somebody to sort?
You mean to
alleviate somebody to sort?
well, mikan shenit and reshus l'reifei l'rapais. I mean, we never take the approach that, listen, God, Rachmana machi v'yu masi. So you're allowed to practice medicine. And I mean, you're a doctor, Marcel, so I assume that even when a person's treated, he's still no picnic. I mean, yeah, but I think that's bichlal mitkad shenit and reshus l'reifei l'rapais. How much what? Well, when I go to the dentist, I ask for Novocaine. Just put me out.
No, but if it's voluntary pain, then you may not have the same benefits.
Well, what's that voluntary?
You see, the Yisurim are time measured. The disease that lasted for an hour is not as bad as one that lasted for 24 hours. Because once he has the disease, it counts more than one if it extends over a period of time.
Okay. So far we have two shittas, Rabbi Isa. The Kikei Lev that says a pshara, the King Ter Bahalocha that says it's also to be mispal that a person should die. So the Sefer Nishmas Avraham from Dr. Avraham Abraham, whose expertise and he's the person. He's a doctor, Dr. Avraham Abraham. He's a prolific author. Wrote a very chashuv form called Nishmas Avraham. He had a lot of shimush by Rosh Hashanah Zalman Auerbach Zatzal and other Gedolei Eretz Yisrael. So his Sefer Nishmas Avraham, which is on the Inyani Refuah, so he quotes a article that Ramesha Feinstein Shlita, so you know that this goes back a few years, that Ramesha Feinstein Shekosav, this is in a Torah journal, but that aforementioned Gemara from Rabbeinu HaKadosh Lashminan Sheikah Lifa'omim Shetzarech Lispalol Al Ha'odam Shemitztayer Ve'in Ma'ilan Minei Refuas L'Rafaisai. Ramesha writes that from that Gemara you see that you can in fact daven that a person should die v'hatfilei sheyisrapil and iskalu shetzarech al shispal shalomas v'mafurish gam b'divrei Rabdimi ayin sham. So you have Rabbi Isai, the entire spectrum. Yesh Aisrim, Yesh Matirim, and Yesh Shenoisim Pesha L'Dover. And that pshara is family members shouldn't daven that the person should either die or live when that's the situation that person wants to die. Other people are in fact allowed to die. So our purpose is not to pass the halacha, but this is the perspective of the different shitas hapaiskim.
3 times a day, you say you're praying and shame
pasuk in Parshas behaloscha tells us, "Vayu anoshim asher hayu tmein lenefesh adam, v'lo yuchol lahakris haPesach b'moyadai." There were people that missed the Korban Pesach. They missed the Korban Pesach for very legitimate reasons. They were Tamei Meis. And they came to Moshe Rabbeinu with the famous words of Lama Nigara. Why should we miss out on the bringing of the Korban Pesach? Lama Nigara. So it is at this point in time that the Ribbonei Shel Olam gave Moshe Rabbeinu and told him about the mitzvah of Pesach Sheni, which is a rare exception in Torah, that you have a make-up period. There are not very many mitzvahs that a person can make them up. Pesach Sheni is an exception. You can make up the Korban Pesach. So the Sifri Rabbi Say over here writes, and he says, Magid shahayu b'nei adam k'sheirim v'tzadikim v'charedim al hamitzvahs. That these people that were so concerned that they missed out on the Korban Pesach, the Sifri refers to them as they were b'nei adam k'sheirim v'tzadikim v'charedim al hamitzvahs. Now, as you all know, Rabbi Say, here in America, when we want to refer to someone as being very, very frum, we call him ultra-Orthodox. Whether you know it or not, all of us here are ultra-Orthodox. But in Eretz Yisrael, the terminology for an ultra-Orthodox, a very frum Jew, is a Haredi. Well, I always wondered where exactly that expression came from. I doubt that it came from the Sifri and Sefer Bamidbar, but it was always like curious to me. Haredi really means a person that trembles. So why did they pick on this adjective to explain someone who's from? He's Haredi, he's trembling. So perhaps at Beisai there's a different touch on the word Haredi and what Haredi really means. And as we see the Sifri refers to these people as Haredim. So I want to explain this at Beisai with a Maisa that I saw in one of Rabbi Yitzchak Zilberstein's Sefer Tzvarim. He brings a Maisa that a few days before Yom Kippur, a Yid comes into him and he says he has to eat on Yom Kippur. Sometimes, not sometimes, many times, quite often, for various medical reasons, a person's got to eat on Yom Kippur. So halacha is that if a person has to eat on Yom Kippur, so there's a whole, if the person's well enough, and the person's up to this, there's a thing called pachas mikashir, which means you don't sit down on Yom Kippur and have a full-fledged meal. You try to eat less than a required amount, and you space it so you stretch it over time. It's not called an achila, it's shloik bechilas pras, etc. It's a little complex. How many ounces, how long you have to wait between every eating, how you have to eat it, drinking, what's the share for drinking. It's a little complex. So he sits down with Yitzchak Zilberstein, he goes through all the halachas, he tells us how much he can eat, how much he can drink, how much he has to wait between each eating, if he's feeling very weak, how much can he be mekel, etc. The ganzer shtichel Torah. Guy says, fine. Comes back the next day and he says, I forgot what you told me, could you go over me again? Fine. Goes to the ganzer shtichel Torah, how many times, how much, the amount of time, we have to be mekel, fine. Got it. Guy goes out, comes back the next day, the Zelba Maisa, the Zelba shtichel Torah, the Zelba Shmuz. This happens 4 or 5 times. So he comes to Rabbi Yitzchak Zilberstein and he says, the lashon he writes over here is, Yeshli nervin b'inyan zeh. Nervin means, I'm all tense about it. I'm nervous. I'm nervous about this. And that's why I keep on forgetting. Which means the guy wasn't an imbecile. The guy wasn't, he was capable of understanding this, but he's so upset, he's so obsessed, he's so nervous about it, that every time he comes home, he forgets the whole thing and he has to be reassured. So Yitzchak Zilberstein wanted to be menachem him. And he said, it's a wonderful thing that you're so nervous. He stells zu Rabbi Sai, he stells zu a Rashi, which we've spoken about in the past, a Rashi at the end of the Torah. The pasuk says, "V'leinosan Hashem lochem leiv ladas v'einayim lirois v'oznayim lishmoya ad hayom hazeh." On the last day of Moshe Rabbeinu's life, he tells Klal Yisrael that the Rebbeinu Shalom hasn't given you the heart to understand, the eyes to see, the ears to hear, ad hayom hazeh, until this day. Finally, you got it. Finally, you have the capability, the eyes, the understanding, etc. Zok Rashi, what happened on that day? Ad hayom hazeh. Zok Rashi. Shamati sha'isa hayom shenosan Moshe sefer Torah lifnei Levi v'yitna v'kemo she'el kaseh b'Parshas Vayelech v'yitna l'hachonim b'nei Levi bo kol Yisrael lifnei Moshe. On the last day of Moshe Rabbeinu's life, Moshe Rabbeinu wrote a Torah and he gave it to the Bnei Levi. Klal Yisrael comes to Moshe Rabbeinu and says, "What's for Maisa? Only the Bnei Levi get the Torah? What's with the rest of us?" Moshe Rabbeinu, we got the Torah also. What's up? Is he giving it to your Bnei Shevet? You're making them the balabatim over the Torah? And you'll see it to turn around in a year from now, 2 years, and 10 years now, and say, we got the Torah. B'samach Moshe al hadavar. Moshe Rabbeinu was thrilled. V'al zeh samar lachem hayom hazeh niyesel l'am. Hayom hazeh hivanti shatem dveikim v'chavetzim b'machim. When they came and they complained, well, what are you talking about? We get the Torah also. Then they were demonstrating their passion for the Torah. Yeah, for the last 39 years, 40 years, yes, they kept the mitzvahs that they were supposed to keep. But Moshe Rabbeinu never saw to what extent it went to their whole being. Because it was always there for them. They never demonstrated this passion. That, what do you mean? This was a gut level reaction. And that's what Moshe Rabbeinu said, Hayom hazeh niyesel l'am. Because I saw today something that I've never seen before. I saw the passion, I saw the emotion, I saw the visceral reaction. What do you mean? We don't get a Torah. And therefore, Hayom hazeh niyesel l'am. He says, when a person is so upset about eating on Yom Kippur that he can't remember from one day to the next simple instructions, that doesn't say anything about a person's mental capabilities. It says something about his chashivas for mitzvahs and how much it bothers him. And that the idea of eating on Yom Kippur or not doing it behaloscha is so important to him that he's so nervous about it that he can't think straight. He says, he talks about this. You see this Keseder, people spend hours buying an esrog. And they buy an esrog. The esrog's beautiful. They're paying a fortune for it, so they take it to a paisek and they ask, "Is this mahuder? Is it a beautiful esrog?" Paisek looks at it for 3 seconds. Mahuder, beautiful. The guy comes back the next day. Did you see that little blettel over here? Now maybe you didn't see that. He looks at, fine, no order. Comes back the next, but you missed this. What's the pshat with these people? You know what the word for these people are? Charedim. Charedim aren't tremblers. Charedim are people that are passionate. They're passionate about their Yiddishkeit. They're passionate about mitzvahs. They feel deprived when they can't do a mitzvah. Loma nigara. Why should we be left out? So the Sifri, these people are Charedim. That's what a Haredi is. The Haredi is a person to whom it makes a difference. Cares about it. He's passionate. He's emotional. That's the taich of a Haredi. The other horror I want to share with you, Rabbi, is a sefer from a sefer called Zohav Mishva from Rav Moshe Shmuel Shapiro. Zichron Levroch was a Talmud of the Brisker Rav. The pasuk says, "Esval yishiv imish miziknei Yisrael asher yadati kihem ziknei ha'am v'sheit Rav." Zok Rashi, what was the qualification for these people to be on the Sanhedrin? This is the Sanhedrin, the first Sanhedrin. Esval yishiv imish meish al gabeim. It's 71. Zok Rashi, Shaltemakir she. Nismanu aleim sheitim b'mitzrayim ba'avedes perach v'ayu merachim aleim umukim al yadam. You know who these people were? These people were the sheitrim in Mitzrayim that the Egyptians appointed, who rather than hitting the Jews to do work, they themselves got geschmissen. They themselves got hit. Ata yismanu b'gdulosan kederach shenitztar b'tzarosan. These are the people that are going to become the Sanhedrin. Zok the Medrash Mikana Talomid Shekol Misha Meiser Atzma Al Yisrael Zeicha LeKavod LeGdula LeRuach HaKodesh. If you're Meiser Nefesh for someone, you suffer on behalf of someone, so you're Zeicha LeKavod LeGdula LeRuach HaKodesh. Wonderful. But Sanhedrin? You have to know something to be on the Sanhedrin. You know, if the whole criterion for Sanhedrin Abaisai was empathy, okay, these people, they would certainly qualify. Maybe that's where he got it from. This should not be construed as an endorsement of Judge Sotomayor. Fine. Wonderful people, empathetic people. So they got geschlagen for Klal Yisrael. But the Sanhedrin had to mamish know something. Besides the fact that the Gemara says that the Sanhedrin had to be makir b'shivim l'shaynes, but as the Yalkut says, he brings a Yalkut. Shaladibu dvarim b'teilem yaylam v'chal sichasen haya b'divrei Torah. The Sanhedrin, they were Gedolei Yisrael. So here these people, they were wonderful, tzaddikim. But how all of a sudden they become roy to be on the Sanhedrin? The answer, he says, is because one of the main kinyonim, the Mishnah tells us, the Memches Dvarim Shatar Niknis Bahem, is B'noise B'oyelim Chaverai. And that need of Noise B'oyelim Chaverai is a path to be kind of Torah. In fact, the Gemara says in Menachos, Yovai Toiv Yikabel Toiv Mitoiv L'Toivim. Says the Gemara, Yovai Toiv Zeh Moshe. Yikabel Toiv Zu Torah. Mitoiv Zeh HaKadosh Baruch Hu. L'Toivim Elu Yisrael. In order to be on the Sanhedrin and to be zeichet to the type of Torah that you need to be on the Sanhedrin, what you need is to be a toiv. You have to be what we call in Yiddish a gutter. You have to be a good person. A good person that cares about other people. Cares about people to the extent that you're willing to be hit on their behalf. When you become that toiv, so then you can be zeicha, yovei toiv, be kabel, Toiv zu Torah mitoiv ze HaKadosh Baruch Hu l'toivim elu Yisrael. As an example thereof, even though there are many examples thereof, he cites his Rebbe, the Brisker Rov, the Tzadik Livrocha. That the Brisker Rov, this is an incident that goes back, to the beginning of the Hakamas HaMedina, when there was the question of what were called the Yaldei Tehran, in which the government wanted to put them into situations where they would abandon their Yiddishkeit. So the Brisker Rov raised ruckus. And he moved mountains to save these children. He writes over here, he once called a meeting on behalf of, the Gedolim. They should do something about Yaldei Tehran. They talked at a meeting, and then everybody left and went on their own way. So he says, the Brisker Rov told, how can anybody go on their back home and to their regular life? What's with these kinder? What will be with these children? These children, they were just Yidden. But the Brisker Rov cared for them so much that he's willing to move mountains. Brings another Maisa that is someone I never heard the name of Noach Shemanovitz. He was one of these boats that tried to run the British blockade, and the British interred him in one of these camps. On Cyprus, the Brisker Rov, he says again, one left no stone unturned in order to try to get the freedom of another Yid. That's the nice of Elam Chaverei. That's the Toiv, that's the Gudskeit. That's the type of person that Zeichet to Torah. He's a nice of Elam Chaverei. And that's the type of person that's right to sit on the Sanhedrin.
This year was presented by Rav Yissocher Frand Shlita.